Hello, Penny Dix with you here again. And in today's video, I'm going to tell you the end of the story about what happened to Psyche and whether she found Eros again. And I'm going to actually bring things into present time because we are in a lockdown, and I do think there may be a lot of people out there who are struggling with relationships. And so I'm going to just take a little look at that and see if I can perhaps give you some pointers to help. But let's finish our story first. So if you remember, Psyche and Eros had met. He'd carried her off, they'd fallen in love, and then she did the one thing that he'd asked her never to do. And all of this is like, in a sense, a metaphor. She had looked at him and he had said, whatever you do, basically, never really know me. So then she loses everything, she loses him, and finally she meets his mother, Aphrodite, and Aphrodite says, well, if you're going to finally be with my son, then you have to prove your worth to me. So she sets Psyche 4 very difficult tasks. And the final task was to go into the underworld. And the metaphor of these tasks is that, in a sense, we all have to, men and women alike, if we don't understand our inner life, our inner world, our inner self, then it is really difficult for us to grow, to mature, and to move towards healthy, mature relationships. So here we have Psyche on her way back up out of the underworld, and she has this wonderful pot of Persephone's beauty balm. And she thinks, surely just one little dab on my cheeks wouldn't hurt, and then I'll be so beautiful that Eros will love me forever. So she just can't resist it. And how many times do we reach a point where we just can't resist looking at something or looking into something that we really know it would be best to just leave it? So she opens the pot, but of course what's in the pot is death. And it covers her whole face and being, and she falls into what is called in the tale a sleep of death. This is like going into a state of being, in a sense, we've hit rock bottom. We can't see anymore. We can't see clearly about anything to do with life, our love, our relationships. And it's a very, very lonely place. Now, there are 2 ways that it can go at this point. Either we stay as women in this state of not knowing and will lose the one that we've fallen in love with, and that will end, and then we'll keep repeating the cycle over and over again. And the problem is, until the woman, the psychology of the woman reaches a point where she realizes that actually something has to change in her. Something actually has to shift in her for her to attain really good, true relationship. So how does this kind of translate into this story? Because in the story, what happens is Eros gets to hear that Psyche has died, and he suddenly realizes how much she actually means to him and how much he actually loves her. So he finds her. He goes and finds her, and because he's a god, he cleans the sleep of death off her eyes. Now, the symbolism of that is that for a woman, she has to find this thinking, intellectual part of her being, this part of her that is not being dominated by her emotions and her needs and her wishes. She has to find this intellectual part, almost like her inner masculine. She has to find this part to kind of cut through the difficulties of this. So Eros in the story is symbolic of the woman waking up. And actually, this is what's happening here, because she is moving from being a girl, a young woman, into being a woman, and a mature woman who can see that she has to actually think more logically and use her intellect in how she will solve the next part of this problem to do with the relationship. So in the story, what happens is she wakes up, she is reunited with Eros, they both declare their love for each other, and Aphrodite, she softens a bit here. But there's a problem, because Psyche is mortal, and Eros is a god, because his mother is a goddess. And Zeus, who is the kind of king of all the gods, thinks he better get involved here. So what he does is he says, well, what we can do is we can transform Psyche into a kind of demigod. We can give her immortality so that she can live in her beautiful loving relationship with Eros for eternity. Well, isn't this how we all feel when we finally meet on the same level in a relationship, where we actually feel that we at last are meeting on common ground with the other in the relationship? And the little kind of ending to the story is that basically they get married and they have a baby. And the baby, and I think this is beautiful, because the baby is named Pleasure. Now, of course, we know in reality that relationships don't really work out like that. And I've only used the story as an illustration of a kind of process that women will go through time and time again in love relationships, until, in a sense, the sleep is wiped from their eyes by their own ability to see the truth and to see the truth in them, that they're then able to move on and to actually have true and good loving relationships. Now, so how does that translate into modern life? And what I really want to talk about today is not so much about relationships under normal circumstances, but relationships in the current territory that we're finding ourselves in. I would suspect that the current situation with lockdown because of the virus is causing immense stress in many relationships. However good those relationships have always been, the ups and downs, this is putting immense pressure on people. And first of all, what I want to say is, please be kind to yourselves and, in a sense, recognize that nobody is perfect in this, and that everybody in this situation is living through probably a crisis that most of us who are living today have never experienced in our lifetime. And this will be causing trauma and distress for many, many people. So how do we, if we look at relationships, one-to-one relationships, and the fact that people who've been used to a certain routine and, you know, one partner's out to work, or maybe both partners are out to work, there may be children, they may have been used to having somebody helping, grandparents, and suddenly all these family units are kind of separated. So you may have mother and father with their children, and I suspect they're going stir crazy, in all honesty. Now, one thing that will help, because it does put relationships under huge stress, this kind of situation, and I suspect that the relationships will do best, the relationships that will work best, are the ones where there is a psychological maturity that both partners experience or have, because that psychological maturity and the ability of both partners to see the bigger picture of what's going on, that this is not a normal situation, will be the glue to allow this relationship to endure in this situation. So if I was going to suggest, some of the basics that we have to observe when we are facing relationships in just everyday normal situations, let alone in a crisis like this. Relationships are about communication. And if there's not good communication, if it's one-sided, if we have partners that don't listen to each other, one partner may have their agenda that they constantly want to get across. We get into blame, we get into judgment, and none of these things are going to be helpful. And the thing is, we will probably repeat patterns that we have got used to repeating in relationships in normal circumstances, and we'll be locked in them within this situation, and maybe even reach times when we think that what's the point? This relationship is obviously doomed. It was never going to work in the first place, and you want to just quit. But if one can, I think it's really important with the stress of this situation to not make any big major decisions about anything during this time. Because, the situation is, we know, is not normal. So it's about trying to find solutions to the short-term difficulties, having time out. If you have a place where you're living where you can get away from each other, and I know not everybody has that ability within their home dwelling, if you're all on top of each other, that is even more difficult. But you have to kind of negotiate ways to create space for each other, and routines and boundaries. And I think I've mentioned before, at the moment, it's perhaps almost about going back to some of the old values, a bit more discipline, and actually getting people to sit down and have proper meals together, because it creates a structure. And I also want to bring in the difficulty, because I've heard a lot in various news feeds about women and relationships where situations are abusive and they're in crisis. And I've seen that there have been a rise in physical attacks on women in relationships because of the confinement of lockdown. And I'm also aware that in the UK, certainly, some of the rules have been kind of altered to accommodate this situation, so that if you're in a situation, an abusive situation, if you really fear for your personal safety, you have to find a way to get out. And within that, you have to get the right help. There are ways, and there are crisis lines that one can call to at least get the advice and the help that one needs. And that's incredibly important. So that if you feel ultimately stressed or at risk, there are ways that you can seek help. There are an immense amount of online counselling services, and I'm offering counselling services at the moment for people in crisis as well. So if we just come back to the basics again, there's something about relationships, because you've actually also got quite a good opportunity to, in a sense, see if you can make your relationship better. Because there are three sides to a relationship. There is a kind of a word that is used, which is called mutuality. And mutuality is recognizing that we have a commitment to each other in a relationship. We also have a commitment to the relationship, and that commitment to the relationship is as important as the commitment to each other. And relationships, and I'm sure you're very much aware of this, have to be worked on every day. They don't just happen. And the situation we're finding ourselves in at the moment, it is even more, I think, important that you listen to each other, that you find ways to work with the difficulties that are coming up, that you're more aware of listening if your partner is not coping. And because everyone, of course, is also going to be reacting to this situation at a different rate in different ways. One will be up, having a great day. Another will be feeling dreadful and just can't understand why her partner is so happy. So try and give space to that. Give yourselves the chance to think, yeah, we're all in this, we're all going through this. And sometimes if the relationship feels so stressed that you think, well, I can't do this anymore. I just want him to leave, or I want her to leave, or I want to leave. Okay, you can't then. my smartwatch just answered me. It doesn't know either. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, we just have to keep remembering that this situation isn't normal. And we have to focus on short-term fixes and routines. And we have to also keep reminding ourselves that none of us are perfect. None of us have got all the answers. It's all very well to think of sort of these lovely stories about Psyche and Eros and how they all lived happily ever after. But of course, the fact is we don't. But I think it's about finding mutual territory. It's about, a good relationship has to have two partners who respect each other, who value each other, who understand that there's a need for space in relationships, that it's important that you both have your things that you will do together, but also that you will have your own hobbies and likes and friends, and that it's okay to enjoy that. Obviously, with our situation, with everything being online, we have to be a little bit more kind of creative with that, but there are ways. So what I'd like to sort of suggest is, because what I'm going to do in the next two videos, I'm going to see if I can help us unpack and look at more at the male psychology and how men fare in relationships, because as I think I've mentioned before, I think they get quite a bad press. And if we find ourselves getting into blame all the time, then what we're not doing is actually addressing what's going on with us, because one of the biggest things that happens in any relationship is projection and judgment, and we don't listen. We really need to try and listen. We really need to, if you're having a heated discussion, don't go, you made me feel that I was stupid. What has to happen is, when you talk like this about my mother, it makes me feel that you don't really ever listen to what I'm saying, so that the other person has somewhere they can come back into and say, well, yeah, no, I do try and listen, so that one can find mutual ground. Always try and own what you're saying and say, I experience it like this, or I wonder if when I said about your mother, it made you feel that I was being critical, or whatever it is that's coming up. So try and be more aware of the words that you use when you're communicating. I mean, this is, as you know, a vast topic, but couples that play together, that work together, that really want to make the relationship work and recognize that it will go through very difficult times as well as very good times, are the relationships that will endure. And sometimes what happens is we give up too quickly on each other. And it's also so important to remember that the other person won't change just because you want them to. The only person that can change is us, the way I see myself in relation to the other. And if I can't make that change, that's actually not the other person's problem. It's my problem. So hopefully I've left you with a few little bits of food for thought. And I want to wish you a pleasant rest of the weekend. And I hope you enjoying these videos, and I hope you'll enjoy my research that I'm going to do over the next couple of days into male psychology. I think that's going to be an interesting topic to tackle. So if you want to join me next week, I'd be absolutely grateful to see you. And thank you so much again. Thank you for your support. And thank you to all of you that I know are watching live. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And I wish you all well. Stay safe and keep well. Thank you. Bye for now.